You want a microphone? Okay.
Please start.
Sure.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Good afternoon. Now let me just see. Um, let me just say, sorry, very good. Start beginning here. Okay, very good. Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody, and great to be here. And I see some new faces and also others as well. So welcome all of you. So as Pinky mentioned, so we are both at the University of Oxford, and we're going to share with you some of the exciting things we have been working with, and we hope we can bring to you. And this is what excites us to sort of come here at a grassroots level and talk about what we can do. A little bit of a background. I won't say too much about myself other than we are pretty much very technical in what we do at Oxford, but also we work with some very large companies, including Microsoft. And we were at Seattle for a week looking at some of the very cool developments. And I think that it is indeed an exciting time to be here and to be in the liberal arts faculty. And I will explain why that is the case, and that is important to know. I'm also very happy to introduce my colleague, Ayse Mutlu. So Ayse has been a part of our course and has been responsible for all the AI pieces there as well. So I start off with this thread, and I spoke to Pinky about this. And this is from Andrej Karpati. Andrej is the current OpenAI CTO. Before that, he was with Tesla. And what he says is that the hottest new programming language is English. English. And why would that be the case? Because all the cool things that are happening in natural language processing, AI, and so on and so forth, are all linguistic based, correct? Which is why I say that it's a very interesting time to be doing what you're doing. And to me, I spend a lot of time looking at the crystal glass, thinking where AI is going. And I spend a lot of time with my chair, with my team, and Oxford has some very smart people, and they always challenge you to sort of with your ideas. And we have some very good references of people. This is one of our students, and we have a very good history of transitioning people to AI. Correct? So they start off somewhere and they become data scientists. This is what Ayse and I really do, and it's a very satisfying thing for us to see people totally transform their careers. And here he talks about our work, and he says good things about Ayse and me, and so on and so forth. And of course, when I was here at SIU in August or September last year, we had a great time. We saw the SIUC's match, and we saw the wonderful deer and things like this. But when I told my folks at Oxford that I'm going to a place called Carbondale, they weren't quite sure why. Yes, but I had a hunch about something, and I think that was my reaction after I finished here working with Pinky and Matt and Renee and so many others. And what is important here is that's the crystal ball bit. What I realized is that no one could have predicted where ChatGPT would go in 3 months after August. But we were very close. Pinckney was very close to saying that. And that, to me, was the significance of when I told that to Oxford, saying that here is a liberal arts college in the middle of sort of Illinois, and what we are doing here is very interesting, and that we should further this relationship and make it grow, both from my commercial perspective, company perspective, and this is why I have brought Ayse this time around, but also more from a strategic perspective. So that was the insight. And what was the big hallelujah Blue Brothers moment is this. That is basically that AI will not take your job, but people who know it will, correct? And that kind of summarizes where we are going with AI. Because people are afraid of their jobs and careers and things like this, but the immediate challenge is going to be that someone who is going to understand these tools and use those tools and are going to be doing something totally game-changing. And the GPT chain is out of the bottle. There's no turning back. Yes. So when we look at everything, there's a fascinating paper today. I'll share it with you, Pinky, about sort of it's kind of putting everything in GPT into an ecosystem, and each of those players become animated. And it's just amazing. It's just like we were saying, every time you open something, you see something entirely new. And what we believe in, and this is where we work at the industry, so I have two hats. One is the fellowship hat, which is more students of Oxford, but more the industry-facing hat. And where the industry leads, education follows, correct? I mean, that's the reality of the world. And that's where we see the industry going to a very specific direction. And this is already happening. So you can see sort of, this is an article in Fortune which talked about how lawyers are doing this. This is something about JP Morgan. They are doing a whole bunch of stuff around ChatGPT. This is PricewaterhouseCoopers also doing a whole bunch of stuff around ChatGPT. So none of this is any more a secret or any more esoteric. So it's here with us now. But why does it matter? So if you're an educationalist, if you work with education, the dirty little secret is we've tried a bunch of stuff and nothing really excites people. Not a lot of things excite people, and not a lot of things scale, right? You might get something small, something interesting, but you can't really make it scale across your university, let alone your state or your country. And here suddenly we have something which people are voluntarily getting involved in and playing and hacking and changing and copying and whatever, yes? But it is an engagement. That is more important than almost anything else. If you have an engagement, you can then sort of nurture it towards directions you want. But if you never have an engagement, you never have a starting point, and that's the significant GPT-3. And this is how I remember education in general. That's the reality of education today. It's like it's one size fits all. But I think that the future is going to be very interesting. And we're going to talk to you about some of the work Ayse and I are doing. And hopefully we will bring it here in a matter of months. So as a person also with high functioning autism spectrum, which I am, I also find this very interesting. I find it very inclusive. And that is very important. People like me in some cases are very good at certain things, certainly the maths. But I think that this is something which is really bringing everybody together. And that's a positive sign of that. And in a decade, we have gone from learning to code to learning to automate. Correct? So if you look at this was about a decade ago, Barack Obama, and everybody was talking about how to learn to code. And many of you might remember this. Yes, so there was all this sort of motivation about getting everybody to code. But suddenly there is a new sort of idea, which is far more easier and far more inclusive, rather than sort of learning cryptic Python code, so that you can do something and automate it and make it happen and make it work and solve your real problems. That's the significance of that. And there's an interesting professor who says within 3 years, programming will completely be automated. Partly he says that on the speed of the GPT windows, so GPT-3, GPT-4, that type of stuff. And if you automate that subsequently, that trajectory would lead to sort of a very significant change in jobs. And I love this picture. I think what has really changed. So this is a picture of a mom and a daughter who are both Boeing pilots. And what I find is that this idea of that you have a co-pilot, correct? Maybe somebody you trust, in this case your child, well, that's a very powerful idea. And that's the big difference, correct? The fact that you have a co-pilot, the fact that the co-pilot is going to engage with you, and the fact that the co-pilot is going to sort of accelerate what you can do. And that mindset of working with a co-pilot is the big change. And we see that the very sort of grassroots fundamental change to people. And the hardest part is reskilling or upskilling people. And why is that? First of all, this makes it easier, correct? So this engagement is what we're dealing with now. We're starting with prompt engineering. We can do a lot of things with prompt engineering. And then there are other things. Yes, so you can do fine tuning and things like this, but the prompt engineering itself gets you a lot of way. And what I find exciting about this is that if you look at the traditional Bloom's taxonomy, as many of us as educationalists have been involved, this is actually flipping Bloom's taxonomy, correct? So what we're trying to say here is that rather than starting from the basics and working each of them forward, you start with the creativity first. You start with the pinnacle of what Bloom's pinnacle was, the creativity. You start with that, and then you actually, that's really more engaging. That's because everybody's creative in their own way. And that's a better place to start, rather than asking them and boring them with lots and lots of minutiae. And you lose them on the way to the top of the pyramid, somewhere halfway down. Yes, so this is what I find interesting we are actually going to present this hopefully at a major conference in Chicago, our work at Oxford. So we have very much, this is not an abstract thing. We've been working with this for about a year and a half, almost 2 years with this. And what I mean by that is, what is the difference? is that knowledge isn't power, applied knowledge is power, correct? So this is what you mean, that you demonstrate what you go from demonstrating what you know to demonstrating what you can apply. Yes. And everybody can do that. So what that means is that you have the Lego, you have the creative side, you have sandcastles, you have all sorts of things. So people are creative, people are able to build stuff. And you have even things like the mechanical. Yes, so I don't know how many people remember something like, maybe that's an English thing, maybe. But certainly you have an equivalent of this somewhere, that people are able to build and craft something. And that is what I mean by inverting the Bloom's taxonomy, so that you do something creative at the outset. And of course, inclusion is an important part. Why inclusion? Over 50s at the moment have a very hard time finding work, as many of you would know in the current situation. But then the young digital natives aren't sort of spectacularly smart as well. I'm not saying in a bad way, but I'm saying that just because you know TikTok doesn't mean more than that. So it's that. And then the IT industry also has a huge problem in terms of ageism, in terms of employment, and so on and so forth. So for us, this idea that we can empower people by this co-pilot idea and empower much more people to code and code faster is what is extremely appealing to us, and what we are developing in Oxford, and we will again share all those tools hopefully here as well going forward. And I found this somewhere on LinkedIn, but what I find interesting is that I actually think this is a good thing. Yes, that people are becoming experts in AI is actually a good thing, because rather than living in sort of castles where nobody they're very maths oriented, why not sort of empower people, have them solve their real own problems and work with this. So what are we doing? Now that's the first part of my talk. The second part of my talk is what we are doing and how this impacts what you do. We're addressing basically three challenges, the way we are working with that. I'll explain them very briefly because I know I have only half an hour before I hand over to Ayse with that. So the first one is, how would you start to learn to code today knowing that you have a co-pilot with you? So this is the first challenge in our mind, and this is something we are working on, developing a set of tools and pedagogy and things like this. So I shared with you the historical sort of working, learning to code kind of thing. And what I'm saying to you now is, today, if we started to learn to code, why would I start from the typical Hello World Python-like thing? Why would I not start from a GitHub Copilot or some such tool, which is a prompting tool, correct? So which is then a code writing tool. And immediately I start to be productive, rather than sort of worrying about what the Python syntax is and so on. My syntax is English, right? And this is what I mean by English becomes the most powerful language. All I need to understand is what the problem is, how I can frame the problem to get the best out of ChatGPT or GPT or GPT-4 and such like. So this becomes the first problem, and then the pedagogy and the tool set to solve that. That's something we are working at Oxford, and that's something we're going to present. Hopefully we bring it here as well, with Jolly and Pinky and so on. The second one is a Gedanken experiment. What if you could rethink the whole curriculum based on GPT and ChatGPT, correct? So rather than worrying about the dichotomy of cheating versus not cheating, what if you could rethink the whole syllabus? And the way we looked at it is, there is a paper which I've referenced here, which talks about the methodology and breaks down the methodology into a number of steps. Then what we're trying to do is to look at each of those steps individually, and then sort of rethink them back into a new pedagogy, correct? So we are trying to say that, okay, this is assessment. That's how assessment looks like. How could you change it in the LLM world, and what would it then mean? And then you combine the whole thing into a pedagogy. This is an extremely interesting idea. And of course, we are again very open about sharing this. It's a part of our course at Oxford, what we're developing, but we'll again make it open and share it with certain tools with that. The next thing is that we're looking at andragogy. So it's not the pedagogy. Andragogy, this word means about the equivalent of pedagogy for adult education, correct? So adults treat the world differently, and there's a whole set of differences between pedagogy and andragogy. And this is the sort of thing we are looking at. Yes, so we're trying to granularize the learning and trying to rethink each of those ideas from a effectively GPT perspective or LLM perspective. But I use the word GPT very openly. We could be using other tools and so on and so forth with that. So And the final one is Ayse is going to cover that a little bit more, is Azure OpenAI Services. We've been working with the Azure OpenAI team for a long time, and of course they've been much sort of aligned with OpenAI vision. That's very interesting for us, because what that means is that there's a whole set of tools. Again, Ayse will sort of briefly take you through them, but that means you effectively build tools on your own data. So if you have a set of books, something like this, then you effectively build a world GPT, which is more oriented towards your own architecture, your own literature, and then combine that with other things with that. So, some concluding thoughts before I hand over to Ayse. The first one is that I love this one. Yes, and this is the 19 whatever it was. I think it's 2000, whatever it was, early part of the internet phase. And this journalist believes that the internet is going to fade away. And that's spectacularly wrong, of course. Then these are maths teachers protesting the use of calculators. Yes. Again, we look at history, and I come from India, and we had unions rebel against computers. I mean, if India had stopped IT, look, I mean, where would it have been, right? But this was a real thing. There were unions stopping specifically IBM at that time, because that was the one company which was quite big at that time. Then there's a very interesting case which talks about a book called The Case Against Education. And what it talks about is the concept of signaling. Correct? So signaling is a real sort of proxy for education, meaning that it's not really what you know when you learn. It's more about what you can demonstrate your subsequent skills, correct? That you can work, you can complete tasks, that type of thing. So if you want to rethink the pedagogy, then you need to rethink the signaling and how you demonstrate in a kind of a multimodal way how all this could work. And the most interesting thing, this I saw from BlackRock, which is the investment, which is a hedge fund, and it says that the capabilities of effectively the GPT are doubling almost every 3 months. The sort of the scope of GPT is doubling. I'm not saying GPT 3 or 4, but the usage is doubling every 3 months. This is the sort of Jeff Bezos moment, yes, when he looked at the scale of the internet and decided, I don't care what I do, even if I sell books here, I think I'll be successful. So it's that kind of a moment with that. And therefore, I see a very big vista, very big opportunity. And I guess we at SIU and we at what we're doing at Oxford, hopefully, this is a great time to be involved into that. And finally, for me, it's all about the tools. Yes, we think about the classic Space Odyssey. See, yes, the beginning of Space Odyssey, where he talked about, where we talk about those apes with those tools, and then you have those sort of, you suddenly go into the future. With that. So it's all about building tools, and that's what we think that would distinguish humans in the age of AI. Yes, so that's what we are trying to do to utilize this technology to make it better. A few final thoughts. What is a killer app? Obviously, there's the productivity. Then there's GPT-4. We love GPT-4. There's some of the other things we are working on. For example, metacognition with AI. Socratic dialogue or the sort of reasoning part of AI. Sparks of Artificial Intelligence, GPT-4 paper. I think this is an amazing paper if you haven't seen it before. And we are in the end looking at transitioning people to AI. That's sort of what we do best, and that's what we want hopefully to sort of create the ecosystem here. Thank you very much. I'll now talk about one little slide, which is the sort of lead up to Ayse's talk. So we talked about what we're doing with Microsoft, and what the significant there is that if you look at the Azure platform, that sort of, it puts a whole series of layers on top of the GPT window. So the GPT side is somewhere here on the second row to the bottom. On the right hand side, you see GPT-3, DALL-E, and so on and so forth. But then you have a whole bunch of other tools. The most interesting from our perspective is the Copilot, which is at the bottom here. But you have also entirely other things. So for example, you have Hugging Face. I don't know who knows Hugging Face. Then you have Dolly, which is from Databricks, correct? Databricks. And then you have at the top, you have a whole bunch of things such as Power Automate, Power Tools, and so on and so forth. So what you are seeing here is that what we believe in is that this sort of thing will kind of embed itself into a wider application development ecosystem, correct? And this is what excites us. And it's all going to be more or less prompt-driven. And that's even the greater beauty of it. I think somebody said the chippy guy character, or I think we talked about that yesterday. Not quite the same, but more interesting in my opinion. So with this, I now hand over to my colleague Ayse, who will continue more about our work specifically in the Azure side and the tools we will build. Thanks, Ayse.
Thank you, Ajit. Hello, everybody, and welcome. Ajit briefly introduced me, but I'm Ayse Mutlu. I'm the lead AI tutor from University of Oxford. And I also would like to start my presentation with a quote. Here it says that coding today is like hand stitching of yesterday, and the AI sewing machine is coming. And why we are saying this? Because back in the days, people were spending hours stitching the fabrics by hands, and it was very time consuming and it was a laborious task. And after the Industrial Revolution and having the sewing machines, all the process became much faster and efficient. And if you look at today, and if you look at the AI is everywhere, and it making all the processes much faster, efficient, and accurate for us. And having the OpenAI and the ChatGPT, think about the processes, how accurate and faster. So, and also, I'll continue my presentation with the OpenAI services. And I just already talked about the GitHub Copilot, GPT-3, GPT-4, DALL-E, and where these terms fits in the Microsoft platform. And we are also going to look at the Power Platforms. You can see it in the second line, like Power Platform. And we are going to look at how Microsoft leveraging the Copilots in their platforms. And GitHub Copilot is an innovative tool, AI-powered tool, which is developed by the OpenAI and the GitHub. So how it works, and so GitHub Copilot is a extension you are installing to the GitHub, and it is using the machine learning algorithms to give you the suggested lines of the code based on the context and the syntax which you are giving. And now I'm going to show you a couple of examples how we are using the GitHub Copilot. So in one of them, in here you are seeing the Visual Studio Code editor, and here you start your code, and here you are seeing the comments is written, like the generative function that retrieves the database items, and Copilot suggested you the code. And all you need to do is, if you see that all is perfect, you just tap the tab button, and you just accept the suggested code by the Copilot. And another example is, again, it converts commands to the code. It's just another example of it. So all you have here is you are describing your Goodreads keys as a string, and then you are saying that get the Goodreads key from the environment variables. If it is not there, fail. And you just use the try and catch condition. It's already suggested you the code. Again, all you need to do is use the tab key from the keyboard, and all is done for you. And it's super efficient, and it is saving your time a lot. And the other example is you can write unit tests as well. For example, you are writing your codes, and you want to write a test scripts as well for your code. And sorry, this was the wrong one. So you already define one of your function to return the common prefix to the toolist, and you want to test this. And all you are doing is you're importing this package, and it already suggests your asserts. The Copilot already suggesting you the asserts for your code. And if you also want to edit or update, you can also change the suggested code lines. And you can also create the SQL queries. This is another way of using the GitHub Copilot. So here, all you have previously is the type of your structure, and you have the function of creating the tables. And you want another function which is going to select the task by the priority. And again, the Copilot suggests you the code. And again, you just click the tab from the keyboard and you accept the code. So far I was talking about only the GitHub Copilot itself, and now I'm going to switch to the Azure platforms and how Azure is integrated the Copilot in their platform and in their services. So Azure OpenAI services is the Azure services, which is using the OpenAI services. So you can get the API key and you can use for your applications within the Azure. And here I'm going to talk to you about the Power Platforms and how the Copilot is used in the Power Platforms as well. But briefly, let me introduce what is Microsoft Power Platforms. They are the low-code solution tools for creating the apps, creating the workflows, and building the AI bots. And Microsoft integrated the Copilot feature in these low-code solution tools. And let's watch this video.
Next generation AI and Power Apps is changing how you develop low-code applications. The next app you build can start with a simple description in natural language.
So here you are writing design an app with a table summarizing. So all you need to do is you're writing what you want. And then you have the Copilot feature on the right-hand side. And again, if you want to update your app or add the column,
Suggestions on how to improve your app so you're never building alone.
it does it for you.
You'll go from idea to app faster than ever before. The future of low code starts today. Imagine it, describe it.
And just one more point I would like to add. Microsoft already had these low-code solution tools like the Power Platforms, just that the Copilot integrated within the platforms. So this was and there are different tools like the Power Apps to create the app, Power Automate to create the workflow and automate your workflow. There is a Power BI to do the visualization. And here we are going to see the example of the Power Apps, which was similar to the other previous one. Yeah. So this will be the silent. Again, this is the platform interface. You describe your app, build a site inspection app today. And then you have the columns, but you're also using the Copilot feature here. It asks add the column called location and populate it with the sample data. And it does it, give me the suggested columns for the table, or add those columns. And it is ready after that. And another example is conversational chat experience, again within the Power Apps. So let's say that you already have an app, but you want to use the conversational chat experience to understand the data and get the insights, the updated insights from your data. So here again, you can ask different questions about your data, what sites were recently inspected, and it analyzes your updated data currently in your app and it answers you. And the other example is the Microsoft Copilot with the Microsoft Power Virtual Agent chatbots. And this is Power Virtual Agents is another low-code tool in the Microsoft Power Platforms, which is creating the chatbots. And again, the Copilot's integrated within the Power Virtual Agent also. So here you have the app. Yes, so you are first of all creating your chatbot. You are also connecting your chatbot within the app, and you are connecting AI-powered chatbots in your app. So you are getting the benefit of the chatbot within your app. And another tool, low-code tool, is the Microsoft Power Automate. And by using the Power Automate, actually you are creating the workflow. So, and for example, you are step-by-step running your workflow. And in this case, it says that the first step is launch a new Microsoft Edge. And you are giving a specific link there. And you are saying that go to this link. And the second step, you are saying that extract the data from this web page. And in your workflow, it goes to the next step and it extracts the data. And then you are adding the AI capability. You are using the OpenAI service to create a text with GPT, or here you are adding, and you are providing the instructions. You are saying that classify the text. So within the web page, when you extract the data, the AI classify the text for you, and in the end, you are adding the display message for your workflow. So once you create this workflow, it goes step by step, and in the end, it displays the message for you by using the AI again, however you want to use the AI. And the Copilot was integrated in the Microsoft Power Platforms. And also, there is a Microsoft 365 Copilot, which means that the Copilot is integrated to Microsoft 365 products, like Word, Excel, or the PowerPoints. Again, you are leveraging the Copilot features within the Microsoft 365 products. Sorry, I'm not able to do the full screen. So as you can see, everything will be based on the prompt, and we are going to give the input, and we are going to get the output in the end.
Pilot has been helping developers at GitHub. What is Power Apps?
Sorry. And Okay. And last thing I would like to mention about the cucumber, which is, I would like to mention about the Gherkin scripts. So this is writing the test scripts. And this is very powerful, and it comes from the test-driven development. And the Cucumber is a tool where you write your Gherkin scripts. Again, you can leverage, you can use the Copilot to write your Gherkin scripts, which we are also working on some of the ideas. Use the Gherkin scripts and using the Copilot. And the final thing is Copilot X. This is from GPT-3. The Copilot X is using the GPT-4, and it is more powerful and more accurate and more efficient than the GPT-3. And this is a quick video about show about capabilities. And I added a couple of important links about the Copilot to the end. And
I can never remember how to.
No.
I was thinking you're speaking.
Now, that's not what we're here,
Where does this come? Okay. And thanks for attending this workshop, and thanks for listening to us. It was a pleasure for me, and feel free to ask us any question, or feel free to add us on anyway.
Sure. Okay, I'd just like to summarize a couple of points on what I just said. So while we talked about Microsoft, at the moment, obviously, Microsoft is way ahead of everybody else. But I think this is the general trend. And then the trend is that you have a large language model, like GPT or Bard or whatever, and then you have a pre-trained model on top of which you have a prompt engineering strategy, and then you have effectively the Copilot, which is the assistant, which helps you with that. And then the final trend, which Ayse was showing, was that it will be integrated throughout the life cycle of the product, wherever it sits in that big picture diagram. And that makes the whole thing extremely powerful. And what we are essentially looking at is sort of uniting those tools into a sort of a pedagogy and a way for people to use them such that they are able to sort of creatively think great things faster. That's sort of one way to put it. Cool. Okay. Now we take questions.
Please, yes, if you will.
Okay, good. Yes, sir.
So early on, you had a slide about chatting with your own data,
Yeah.
which intrigued me. And the examples you give, it can work with your coding, your spreadsheets. How would people in the liberal arts use it? Like, for example, I've used Bing Chat and ChatGPT, and it's useful. But I have material that I wanted to work on. How do I get the AI to work on my material?
And that is exactly what we meant by chatting with your own data. So it effectively, with those tools, you then point it out to say that this is the repository which you want to use it as a basis for your Q&A. So, for example, so then you have a starting point of the large language model itself, but you also tell it to retrain it on top of specific things which you provide. So it's not a part of the GPT. It is, however, part of the Azure OpenAI tools in there. So if you know the GPT world kind of stuff, so there is OpenAI, correct? OpenAI GPT, which is the APIs. And then with the GPT 3.5, which was Da Vinci, correct? Da Vinci, which is the current ChatGPT. And then there is GPT-4, and so on. And therefore, this thing will be integrated into the Azure toolset is a version of GPT with other stuff built on top. So that's the reason why. So it is indeed exactly as I said, and as you interpreted, but it is actually chatting with your own data. So it's your own data. So imagine thinking you had a book and you wanted to write about the sort of create a particular sort of discussion on that book. Then you could add his book and some notes with that. And then there are things like line chain and semantic kernel, tools like this, which effectively maybe Pinkney can even add a little bit. They're almost application development platforms, and you can chain different things together to create. I mean, Google that if you want to, or sort of Bing that, or whatever you can call it. But yeah, line chain or semantic kernel. So that becomes the whole application development platform based on LLMs. So that's an area which we are working on quite a bit as well. Cool. Thanks. Yes, sir.
I think my question is building on the previous question, but it's slightly more specific. So, and if it's, I followed about half of what you guys were saying, but I think I get some of the basics. So, but let's pretend I'm teaching a class, right? And it's an American Studies class, so it's combining history, literature, a little bit of philosophy, those types of approaches, right? So let's pretend the question is, and I've used a version of this before, will Donald Trump be elected president, right? I want my students to be able to address this from a variety of different perspectives, depending on what they want to do. Demographic, philosophical, talk about, political movements, et cetera, right? So what would you suggest are strategies going in? Would I create apps or have students create apps? Like, what are some initial moves that I should make to manipulate all these chunks of information that are kind of swirling around? I know that's really specific, but I want to be specific.
No, that's a good question. It's the sort of thing which we always think about. Now there is the easy part, which is the experimentation, and maybe Pinkney can also chip into this thing, correct? So the easy part is experimentation, because every time you have a prompt of some kind, for what is the philosophical implication for Donald Trump winning the next election, something like this, correct? So that, and of course, every time you have a prompt, it's not guaranteed to return the same answer. So then you have a whole conversation, and then you sort of build on nuances of the conversation, because you don't stop at the first prompt. You continue to build on that and enhance that. Where it gets more interesting is some of the slides which I didn't include here, was the things where you prompt people and then you get different perspectives and then you start to combine them into something else. So this is generally the way, so you would need to guide them. So that is my point here. And maybe Pinkney can add something here as well.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think these are, I love these questions because these are exactly the sorts of tools we're going to be building, right? And that is, for you, John, for instance, you won't need to know how this is happening, right? If I understand the sort of tool and we can communicate and we can build the tool that will let you just say, listen, I have this database, I want to be able to converse with it. And it really will be, the interface will be conversational, right? This is going to be built into, as we just saw, all of Microsoft 365, every Office tool, but we're also going to be building bespoke, custom tools that liberal arts people and artists need in order to answer exactly the question or your question, right? To say, how do I begin this? Well, that's actually a great question for a chat engine, right? Going into GPT-4 and saying, I'm going to be talking to 15 undergraduates who only know the world through their phones. How should I approach, right? And that's the kind of thing ChatGPT is very, very good at. Like what's the first week of my class with GPT-4 look like? Here's my syllabus. How would you integrate yourself into this syllabus, right? Because none of what we're going to do, and this is why this partnership seems very important to me, right, is none of what we're going to do is going to be the hard coding part of this. We use language, right? I mean, and all of these interfaces are moving to language. So the questions that you're asking are actually great questions for GPT-4. Even, I have this massive data. It's, whatever form it's in. I have 1,000 Excel spreadsheets, or I have a dozen Microsoft documents. How should I set that information up so that I can converse with you about it? And the AI will actually answer that question. And if it's too technical an answer, I type in all the time, I'm kind of a moron, you're way smarter than I am, explain this to me, just give me bullet points of things I can do. And it is remarkable how quickly you get used to that give and take. Because with the chat, with the AI interfaces, with these English interfaces, you don't have to have any level of expertise beyond the ability to ask questions. I mean, it is perfect for the liberal arts because it is that conversational thing, right? You don't have to come in as an expert, right, and say, I want, here's exactly what I want to do, right? You can just say, how does this work? What do you suggest? Is that a fair?
Yeah, I think that I'll add a couple more things to this before I take the next question. And sort of so what makes me that those are sort of tools we are trying to build, correct? So that's the key point to that, because that's exactly the question of working with educators, and we are working with a couple of other universities as well, trying to build those sort of tools on the education front. So that's extremely useful. I'll give you a slightly abstract answer to this question. So one of the things which we are working on now is to understand how GPT understands belief systems, correct? So for example, we chose 3 or 4 belief systems: UFOs, reincarnation, flat earth theory, something like this, correct? Then we asked GPT about what, imagine if you believed in UFOs, try to convince me that UFOs exist, correct? And then we looked at the sort of transcripts of a UFO conference, such things do exist. And then we kind of analyzed the human responses to the same question, and what were the computational linguistic differences of those two threads. So there's a lot of work going on into this. I would think that a lot of it will play out. But yes, I hope that answers your question. Cool. Now, 2 more questions. I'll take you and then yeah.
So I actually had I'm curious with your perspective and what you've understood so far. There seems to be an issue with trust related to the AI and the responses and feedback and information it's giving. What is Microsoft doing to address those issues? And then 2, how are they putting into place that this isn't going to be another situation like the Zoom or something else where they're first to market but then get surpassed because of better user application or better direction towards what the needs actually are?
Right. So first of all, I'd like to caveat that it's us, so we are Oxford and we are teachers. So I would not answer on behalf of our company. So this is my first caveat. The second thing is that there is a lot of work going on in this area. There is a whole work which we are also working on the responsible AI piece, where we are looking at a lot of things around how you can put in responsible AI tools around the whole architecture within that. And it is a very interesting sort of moving dynamic, and I wouldn't say that it is complete. I wouldn't even say that. I mean, the critical thing is it's a chatbot and not a search engine, correct? I mean, there's a certain school of philosophy that we are almost moving past the post. We are past the post-search era, so we are in the post-search era. where you are not necessarily asking it to find an answer, but actually working with the concept to understand that. So in my mind, I think there is a certain amount of shift in the mindset and the thinking and the responsible AI and the ethics and so on and so forth. All of those will come into play. So I hope that's the best answer I can give. Thank you. Sorry, Ayse, do you want to add anything with this? No, that's fine.
Thank you so much for this. I guess I'm just ambivalent, I just wanted to express my ambivalence. So one of the things is, like, in the humanities, we want our students to approach the primary material, right? Just like the mathematicians of that previous time wanted people to calculate. But I think this is not the same as, reading is not the same as, like, let the machine calculate for me, because there is just something very intrinsic about how you read, and how I read would be different from how you would read something. And I know we already live in this world where students are not reading primary text, right? They're already, like, getting their reviews on Google and stuff like that. And what worries me about this is that if we use this as a pedagogical tool, we will be legitimizing already this secondary way to know text, and that will do something to our sense of history.
No, that's a valid question. Again, very good thought. So the journal bit which you said is one part of it. So there is the bit which, when you look at a primary text and you summarize it. So that's, I think, that is your question. And that's a very common use of AI, just in traditionally GPT and ChatGPT and so on and so forth, to summarize documents, much as you see on a number of websites which summarize books and so on and so forth. But it is done faster, it is done at scale, etc. I think there are other ways in which you can think about it, which would involve going to the primary text. So, for example, I would then look at the perspective of a primary text and ask it from a different perspective. So I think we were talking about yesterday, if a particular composer were alive for 50 more years, how would he or she compose? Or if Shakespeare were alive today, how would he rewrite his work? And that's a very engaging and an interesting way to engage with the primary text, correct? I mean, that's how, not knowing much about literature other than personal reading. I actually borrowed this example from Jody yesterday. So it's a kind of adaptation of what we were talking about yesterday. But I would say that then I would ask the question to ChatGPT that if Shakespeare were to rewrite all his work today, what would it look like? Maybe choose a particular book. And that, I think, is a very engaging way for a young person to look at primary text and not summarize it, but reinterpret it. So that's how I see that. So I don't see GPT as summarization alone. That is sort of gist of what I'm trying to say.
But in your answer, you're still talking about how they would see how Shakespeare would write in the present. But when we read Shakespeare, that world comes alive for us. They had candles to light the stage, what they were eating, what sort of, was the construction of that theater. So I think that's what I'm talking about.
I don't discount that. So I think that there is the other element which I was thinking about, which was sort of before I gave you this example, is I'm spending a lot of time with GPT-4, and GPT-4 has a multimodal perspective, correct? So that opens up a whole enriching side of things. So think about all these candles and all that type of stuff. You almost prompt it or you show it a picture, and then it creates something on its own. I think that's a very fascinating thing because then you're sort of engaging multiple senses for the learner to engage with material. That would be the best answer. Okay, thank you. Yes, there were some more questions here. Yes. Nice to see you again, by the way. Yes. From last, yes, sir. Yeah.
Can you envision? This is a dystopian.
Yeah.
Future.
Oh, I love dystopian.
The database feeds like the database. right, a big pool of information, starts to feed on itself and gets a kind of momentum on some sort of big truth or set of facts or way of understanding that essentially then becomes the thing that it will always produce, and that momentum sort of only accelerates as it keeps reading its own information, and we sort of can't get back to before that started. I hope that's sort of clear.
It kind of sounds to me like the liberal arts. I mean, right, there is this kind of feedback system to a certain extent in the liberal arts already. I mean, not that
I know, but seriously, it's like no one cares about the liberal arts. I mean, like our biases, whatever they may be, are not the big computer that everybody's doing their searching, right?
So I heard this question in slightly another context, and that was copyright. So what I heard about this was that, like, if the first time you read something from a primary source, you got that, and that's in public domain now, correct? So the first time maybe GPT-3 did something, then came along another GPT-4 or GPT whatever, and then read it again, and now it is a second level of abstraction, right? And therefore that can continue, sort of losing the link to the first one. And the question there was more about copyright, but your question is more about the primary source of information, as was the question here as well.
The primary source of information becomes not the world, but becomes the database, the chat's interpretation of its own database as it continues to churn that data.
I believe all these are valid questions, and I don't claim to know an answer to some of these. But they are again something which hopefully will. I have a very technical answer to some of these questions, which I can share with you if you want. There is a whole set of algorithms called causal machine learning, which look at cause and effect. So if you look at Stephen Wolfram, who wrote something, who is the creator of something called Wolfram Alpha. So he had one of the first GPT plugins, and he effectively looks at a body of truth or a body of knowledge which is based on causal facts. And that's a very mathematical answer, but such a thing does exist. The question is how much would be the norm, how much effort is required to go into that, and how many levels deep would we go before we lose the primary source of information. So again, it's a very valid question. Regarding the dystopian thing, I think one of the most interesting dystopian views I've seen is Orwell versus Huxley, correct? I mean, liberal arts, I think you can talk about Orwell and Huxley, yes. So if you look at the Orwellian dystopia, which is Control, yes, 1984 by the way. But the Huxley way of thinking is actually the Brave New World, where everything is given to you, and you sort of become compliant, and sort of like the lady here said, that you sort of lost the truth of what it is you're used to everything being done for you. So these are very valid questions. I mean, the dystopia discussion is very valid in many ways, and that will continue. I hope it continues in this form. Cool. The question there at the back, sir? Yes? No, sorry.
No, I had put my hand up and I was just building off what you were saying. There's a reappearing woman with a horrifying face that has been documented coming up through AI engines, just kind of reinforcing what he was talking about, that because of the training models and then building in on itself and building in on itself, it self-propagates.
No, I totally agree. I mean, now these are valid questions, valid problems. Yeah. Cool. Yes, sir, at the back.
I sort of have a related question as well. So I think one of the challenges with using these types of things in an educational setting is that, and I mean this in a technical sense, ChatGPT is a bullshitter. It makes stuff up because it's a model that's designed to be communicative, but not necessarily to be factually correct. So I asked it about myself, and I suddenly had written 3 books that don't exist, and had, expertise in all sorts of things that, are also not actually fields. So I'm wondering how do we incorporate something that is more than happy to make up its own facts in this sort of pedagogical setting?
Yeah, so again, the question is how would you use it to have a discussion around something with the caveat that like saying that it is actually not a fact, right? So in that because all it is a generator of the next word or the next phrase, and the ability to analyze data gives it's spectacularly good at what it does, but not always correct. So with that sort of first point in mind, the question you asked was how do we incorporate something like this into the educational context? So I would think that one of the examples I was looking at was this idea which we call Gedanken.ai. Gedanken means again the sort of the thought experiment idea. So there you use GPT to have a conversation about a topic which is not factually agreed upon by people, right? So for example, if I were to talk to you about the benefits or otherwise of genetically modified foods, right? If whatever my position is, no matter how many facts I throw at you, if you do not believe this idea, you are not going to change your position. So it's that point of discussion which can be used by something of a chatbot to ideate and understand based on all that information. So definitely it is not a factual replacement of any pedagogy, but it has a role which might be different. That's accurate. Cool. Yes. Oh, yes, one more.
Just one more question. I'm just thinking about conversations I have, with parents who come in and say, should my, kid be, my son or daughter be an English major or a history major or something like that. And so I was just wondering if you could think out loud for a second about the job market and how, not really how, we can incorporate it, although maybe, but what's on the other end? What am I going to tell parents who are worried about a liberal arts degree? How are those kids, how are they going to be robot proof? How are they going to fit into a job market in 5 years or something like that? How is the job market perhaps changing, today as we speak?
So I think that the job market is changing pretty much towards some of those trends which we were talking about. When I'm talking about job market, I'm talking about AI, and talking about the general idea that you can use some of these tools to accelerate any task, correct? So that is the fundamental thing behind it. You ignore the GPT, you ignore the chat GPT and things like that. The question is, given a tool, can you do your work faster? And if you're able to understand how the tool works. Now, the gentleman at the back who asked the question about the bullshitting type of argument, there is a long technical analysis to that question, is to understand how the algorithm of GPT operates. It operates on something called reinforcement learning by human feedback, RLHF, along with the transformer architecture. So if you start to sort of think about how it works, then it's a question of how you can utilize these things based on that. So the long answer to your question, I think that this is going to become pretty much endemic into everything. I'm not talking about a company. I'm not talking about, we just referred one company because of the work we're doing, and also Microsoft is far ahead at this point among other people. But that's not to say that others will not catch up. I'm sure they will. I'm sure they will have more tools as well. So I just see this as a much more broader trend. And I see that as a positive thing for anybody who has, like I said, who has command of the language and has the ability to structure their thinking and to look at critical thinking within a dialogue within that. So I think that's the bit which again mitigates the question of the gentleman back, is that whatever you're getting out of it is the critical thinking bit and the responsible AI piece, which I think are going to be the distinguishing factors. And the fact that you can then use this tool to accelerate your output would make you a more valuable employee. Certainly, next 5 years, I would think would be the case for sure, because this is just starting and it's accelerating at such a fast rate. And the good thing about all of these technologies is that because they are just already in the cloud, correct? So it didn't take these guys long to actually incorporate them into the next version of their product. And Google will do the same thing, as will somebody else. So I just see that's in my mind, that's a good thing. So that's how I see the job market. I almost see the job market as a given role with the ability. I mean, the prompt engine, somebody was talking about that. There are some serious 6-figure job opportunities for prompt engineers at the moment. Completely untechnical role, right? You do not need to know anything at all about technology. It's a prompt engineering job. It's the ability for you to phrase a dialogue so that you get the best out of it, and not like the gentleman in the back was saying that you get rubbish out of it, but you utilize it to the best possible way.
And I think that's what the liberal arts are made for, right? Is to have the knowledge of the primary sources, which are contained within the large language model, right? That is all of Shakespeare, and you could just say, GPT-4, please, give me Henry V, and it can absolutely give you an encounter with the original document, right? But then it can also converse with you about it, and as we, as language people, learn to talk to the AIs, which are not like your computer. I mean, they really are much more like entities, they're like beings in a way, and they can be haunted, Aaron. And you're absolutely right about the scary lady. I have yet to see her, but I keep hoping. But it is we have the skills and the ability to equip people to work with these large language models. So the whole world is moving toward people who can write well and who can understand the references to me. Right? If you don't have the original, if you haven't encountered Shakespeare in the original, you can't make the allusions that you need in order to pull the best work out of the large language model, if that makes sense, right? So it's very, very helpful to have a liberal arts education to communicate with these beings that essentially are all of literature.
I think the high school kids have already started using it, right? So, we're also going to be educating kids who come using it.
Sorry, I'll come to your question. I think I'll again echo what Pinky was saying, was the fact that, first of all, the knowledge of the primary source is important to understand the validity of the response you're getting from GPT. That's what you're talking with Shakespeare context. The other thing is, in my mind, this is all about tools. So that's what we are building, and that's what we are spending a lot of time on, and kind of eating our own dog food, as the American expression goes, because we are using it in our teaching with that. And we're using it in a much more sophisticated way. So Ayse mentioned about test scripts, correct? So if you sort of try to think about how to test code, so you're writing your test script from prompts. And you can do it both ways. You can write the code and write the test script, or you can write the test script and generate code. So it's a two-way thing, and it's a very powerful idea. Similarly, how to write AI code for that, how to write machine learning code for that. All that is very much in the realms of possibility. We have our colleagues and Ayse also working on that thing. For us, I think these are things hopefully will get better. Yes, sir, you have a question.
So when I've had conversations with ChatGPT, it returns useful information, and now it cites it with links to where it found it. But I'm trying to grasp whether or not, does it go beyond the public domain? I mean, Shakespeare is available on Google Books. It can find it.
Yes, it does go beyond the public domain. I've had several conversations about like Haruki Murakami novels or other pieces of modern media that it discusses. It probably wouldn't like feed you the text of it, but it could explain such and such idea.
Does that present IP challenges?
Yeah. So the question is, how was it trained, correct? So was it trained using acquiring that knowledge to train it or something like that? There is an ongoing IP challenge with all of these things, and that's a longer discussion of a question people have at the moment. Is the fact that it essentially crawls the whole internet and then picks up all of that, and that includes the images and so on and so forth. Even in the code, there is an interesting challenge, which was the fact that even if the code is open sourced, it needs attribution, correct? So even if you use open source code to train it, that is practically the only requirement of many of these open source things, that you need to attribute it. So once it starts to use it like this, where it is sort of picked up from somewhere, it's not necessarily attributed to the original source. So that's an open IP problem at the moment. But I will share with you one final point, which is interesting. Large language models, and this is not a sort of an esoteric discussion, large language models, there is a number of theories and discussions to point that they are emergent as opposed to sentient, correct? So there is a difference between the two. The sentient side is a little bit more sort of philosophical and kind of emergence is a well-known phenomena. Everything from ant colonies and so on and so forth. So the question is, given enough scale, are they generating something new on their own, or would they be potentially doing so in the future, having not seen something like that? That's an open question. Yeah, cool.
Thank you both very much. My delicate nose tells me that there is a reception waiting outside. I'm champing at the bit, so please join us, and you can talk to our guests and get their advice.